God, we invite and evoke your word and your spirit to this time of reflection. There is a word that has been preached from the lips of a Christ who came that is just as relevant in ancient days as it is today. Contextually different, but eminently important to us. So we ask, God, that you would enlighten this space and time for your reflection and revelation. In the name of Jesus, amen. So I've been working on the fine art of learning to know which questions to answer. About 6 years ago, I was part of this group of clergy, back then we were young, called the Beatitude Society. And they wanted to support young clergy, progressive in their orientations, to be more effective in our work. And one of the things they offered us was for us to go through what they call media training through Auburn Seminary, which is based here in New York City. Back in those days, I'd never really been interviewed for anything except for jobs. And I had no idea how to handle television or any of what goes into preparing for that. And a man named Mackie Alston changed all this. And this is good, by the way. Please, they don't need to move. Let the children come, Jesus said. This is their space more than ours. But anyway, besides teaching some key things like research whoever's inviting you and don't go where you know they're going to trap you, he prepared us to understand what kinds of questions we were willing to answer and which ones we were going to have to step away from. Because interrogators, or people who ask questions, work really, really hard to get into our heads to control the story, if you will, or to throw us off and get good television or control or whatever. And if we let the people who come at us determine the kinds of words that emerge from our mouths, then we can lose ourselves. And by my read, the most brilliant person ever recorded in history at the redirect was Jesus Christ himself. And people asked him questions all of the time because they knew he was vulnerable. They knew that if he said certain things, it could get him in big trouble. And the they I mean here, I want to say again, is really important to address because it comes up a lot in John, but all over the New Testament. Remember that not everybody was friends back then, same as now. And there were religious authorities who were in bed with the empire, which is nothing new nor old. It is current and ancient at the same time. And they just could not stand Jesus for a number of reasons. But those religious leaders were, as always, a group of very powerful men who wanted to make sure that Jesus stayed in the place they wanted for him. So again, remember that it's of crucial importance to remember that the Jews, as named in the Gospels, are not the Jewish people. It's a group of very specific people. But John knew what he meant when he used that term. But we make a grave mistake if we ascribe any culpability to the Jewish people we know now to Jesus' suffering. And in fact, remember this. We could find plenty of people who call themselves Christians who oppose Jesus every single day. And no one has more of a corner on these behaviors than the empire itself. But back to this text. There was a way to interrogate Jesus so that his questions would get him in sufficient trouble that the state would take him down. And he knew this, which is why, to a reader's frustration, Jesus rarely answered the questions that anyone asked him in the way they wanted him to, not the way they were posed. Instead, he knew himself He knew his mind. He knew what he was sent to this earth to do and to teach. And he said that. Exclusively that. Undeterred and mostly unbothered by his opposition's attempts, Jesus stayed on message. And while they would try to get him to comment about shifting political powers, or the upcoming elections, if you will, his word wasn't about them. It was about God's power. And they wanted to get him to commit treason. But he wasn't even looking at their rulers because he knew who was in charge in his life. And here's my point for today. It doesn't matter what our platforms, so to speak, are, or how many followers we have, there will always be someone who will come at us, interrogators, if you will, who will try to knock us off our course, to try to put words in our mouths that don't belong there. There will always be people around us who will try to distract us and detract us and get us in trouble, and even attempt to obstruct our paths to salvation. But like Jesus, you have to remember this. Nothing can obstruct God. And when God has put you on a mission, I promise you that God will see you through. The voices and the questions and the distractions will come. But if you hold to your mission, then nothing can stop you. Just the other day, I went down to the Japan Society for a conversation with a number of people who were reflecting on family separation, both as a historic act and also how it's been happening here in the United States in our time right now. And so they had leaders who had come from the Lakota tribe. They had leaders who came from Harlem in the Bronx, who work with people who are facing mass incarceration and the separation of families that are connected to that, especially in Black communities. They had leaders from the border. They had people who were facing deportation who also get separated from their families. They had, and this was the Japan Society, they had people who had been for generations now working with the survivors of Japanese internment. And all of these folks came together because there had been a question of whether or not this thing we are doing with children is American. And to a person, each one who had been doing what I would characterize as their ministry in their lane was clear. Family separation is as American as apple pie, but it doesn't have to be. And their mission was to name the wrong and to claim the healing. And to name the wrong is a mission that we all have the opportunity to stand in Jesus' path and to replicate. But people will try to say, oh, that's too political, or it's too scary, or it's too much work. But one man whose parents had been part of the Japanese internment said this. He said, when we forget that children are our sacred trust, that they are the ones who we were given this earth to make better, when we forget that we are about to leave them with problems that they may not be able to solve with an earth that is burning, when we rip them out of their mother's hands and place them into, the going rate, actually, one of the women from the Lakota tribe taught me, for a Lakota child right now on the private market, which is very popular, is somewhere between $60,000 and $150,000. And these children who are placed in our public trust, who when Jesus said, let the children come first, when they are not our mission, when we get distracted for all the other things that are coming at us, how are we following in the path of Jesus? We deal with hard things when we listen to God. But a God who would put before us the problem reminds us that we are the answer. And when Jesus walked this earth, and they tried to get him to be about some other things, he said no. And we ask that we won't be either. Let's come together and remember that the blessing to this world is us. That is our mission. And for that, I give thanks to God. Amen.